Scientists finally decoded elephant communication. The first message shocked them. Elephant rumbles happen so low that human ears cannot hear most of them at all. Scientists had no real way to translate any of it for over a century. Then researchers pointed a machine learning program built for pattern recognition at hundreds of these calls, something no elephant expert had ever tried before. What it found inside a single rumble stunned the entire research team completely. The sound nobody could hear. In May 1984, a scientist named Katie Payne visited a zoo in Portland, Oregon, to give a talk about whale songs, a subject she had spent 15 years studying at that point in her career. While standing near the elephant enclosure, just to relax before her talk, she began feeling something strange in the air, a throbbing sensation with almost no actual sound attached to it. She had felt something similar once before, while singing in a large church choir backed by a pipe organ, when the lowest notes seemed to shake the air itself, rather than simply reach the ears the way normal sound does. It was not until her flight home that she connected the two memories and realized she might be onto something nobody had documented before. Payne suspected the elephants were producing sound too low in pitch for humans to hear, a phenomenon called infrasound. She returned to the zoo months later with recording equipment set to capture frequencies far below the normal range of human hearing, working around the clock with a colleague for an entire month. After slowing the tapes down and studying them closely back at her lab, she confirmed it. The elephants had been talking the entire time, in a register so deep that people standing 3 feet away heard almost nothing at all. That discovery opened up an entirely new field of research almost overnight, but it also raised a much bigger question that would take another 40 years to answer. If elephants were holding entire conversations humans could not hear, what exactly were they saying to each other? What a rumble actually is. Elephants make sound the same basic way humans do, by pushing air past their vocal cords and letting them vibrate as they exhale. What makes their calls so unusual is how deep those vibrations go, often between 14 and 35 cycles per second, well below the 20-cycle threshold most human ears can detect at all. These low rumbles can travel through open air for several kilometers, and under calm conditions, cool, still air near dawn or dusk, they can reach even farther across open grassland. Forest elephants living under thick jungle canopy in Central Africa rely on these calls even more heavily than their savanna relatives do. Thick vegetation blocks higher-pitched sound almost completely within 100 meters, but the lowest frequencies can still push through the trees and reach family members who are otherwise completely out of sight. Researchers eventually learned that rumbles come in several distinct types, depending on the situation an elephant finds itself in. A contact rumble gets used to reach a family member who has wandered out of sight. A greeting rumble happens when two elephants that already know each other come back within touching distance after time apart. A caregiving rumble comes from an adult female looking after a calf that needs reassurance nearby. For a long time, sorting calls into these broad categories was as far as the science could go. Pulling out something as specific and personal as an individual name buried inside a rumble seemed nearly impossible using human ears alone, no matter how well trained those ears were. Bringing in a machine to listen instead of a person, researchers at Colorado State University eventually teamed up with the nonprofit groups Save the Elephants and Elephant Voices, to tackle the naming question from a completely different angle. Instead of relying only on trained human ears, they pulled together 469 recorded rumbles collected from wild elephant families in Kenya between 1986 and 2022, gathered across Amboseli National Park, along with the Samburu and Buffalo Springs reserves. Every elephant in these family groups had already been identified individually over the decades by researchers studying the shape and notches worn into their ears, meaning scientists already knew exactly who was calling and roughly who the call seemed aimed at in each recording collected. That gave the team something rare to work with: a huge library of calls where both the sender and the likely intended receiver were already confirmed well before any machine got involved. Kurt Fristrup, an engineer working on the team, built an entirely new way of processing the audio that could catch tiny structural differences in each call that a human listening by ear would almost certainly miss. He and lead researcher Michael Pardo then trained a machine learning model on this processed data, hoping it could learn to guess who a call was meant for using nothing but the raw sound itself. Nobody on the team knew for certain what the model would find once it finished analyzing all that audio, or whether it would find anything meaningful at all buried inside the noise. The moment the pattern appeared, the results came back in 2024, and they held up far better than anyone on the team had expected going in. Working only from the acoustic structure of each rumble, the model correctly guessed the intended target of a call about 27.5% of the time across the entire dataset. That number sounds small, sitting on its own, but it was significantly higher than what the same model produced when it was fed random, unrelated audio clips instead, proving the calls truly did carry something specific pointing at one elephant over every other elephant nearby. Even more telling, the model was not simply picking up on an elephant copying the voice of the animal it was calling toward, the way some other species handle this same problem. Dolphins and parrots address each other by directly imitating the exact signature sound of whoever they happen to be calling to. Elephants seem to be doing something closer to what humans do instead, using an arbitrary label with no direct connection to the receiver's own natural voice. That single distinction mattered enormously to the researchers involved, because it suggested elephants were not simply copying sound back and forth between each other like an echo. They appeared to be assigning something closer to a real symbol to specific individuals, similar in principle to how a human name actually functions in conversation. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Confirming this pattern existed inside the recordings was only half of the puzzle researchers still needed to solve before publishing anything at all. Proving the elephants were actually listening for their own name. To test the theory further, researchers played recorded calls back to 17 wild elephants through a hidden speaker set up in the brush nearby. Sometimes the recording played back was a call originally addressed to that specific elephant listening. Other times, it was a recording from the exact same caller, but originally meant for a completely different elephant, somewhere else in the group. The difference in how elephants reacted was clear and remarkably consistent across the entire test group. When elephants heard a call that had originally been meant for them personally, they responded faster, walked toward the hidden speaker more quickly, and called back in response far more often than usual. When they heard that same caller's voice aimed at a different elephant instead, their reaction was noticeably weaker and much slower to start. This told researchers something important about how elephant hearing actually works in practice. The elephants were not simply reacting to a familiar voice they already recognized from experience. They were picking out specific acoustic information buried inside the call that told them whether the message was truly meant for them, even when that same call was played back completely out of its original context and setting. Lead researcher Michael Pardo explained that this ability let elephants figure out exactly who a call was intended for, just from hearing its acoustic pattern alone, without needing any other visual or situational clues around them. That single detail convinced many scientists this discovery was not just a coincidence, sitting inside a small dataset somewhere. Why this mattered so much to scientists. Personal names are something almost no other species on Earth uses the way humans naturally do. A human name is not built from copying the sound a person makes on their own. It functions instead as an assigned label, agreed upon socially over time, that stands in for one specific individual, no matter what that person actually sounds like when they speak. Finding anything close to that ability outside of humans is exceptionally rare in the animal kingdom. Dolphins and parrots come reasonably close, but they get there by copying the target's own call back at them, essentially repeating a sound the other animal already produces on its own. Elephants appeared to be doing something different, and in some ways more advanced, using labels that were not copies of anything the receiving elephant made itself. Researchers pointed out that elephants and humans share some surprisingly deep similarities in how their social lives are structured day to day. Both species live in tight family groups, form bonds that can last for decades, and regularly need to reach specific individuals who might be far out of sight at any given moment. Scientists suspect those shared social pressures may have pushed both species toward inventing a similar solution, even though elephants and humans are separated by tens of millions of years of separate evolution. Confirming that elephants had something like real names solved one enormous mystery for researchers, but it opened up several more questions almost immediately afterward. What scientists still do not know. Even with these strong results, researchers openly admit there is a great deal left to figure out about how this system actually works. Nobody has been able to pinpoint the exact part of the rumble that functions as the true label yet. Scientists are not fully certain whether separate elephant families invent completely different names for the same familiar individual, or whether some kind of shared naming pattern exists across herds that simply has not been spotted in the data so far. Gathering the field data needed to answer those remaining questions is brutally difficult work in practice. Researchers have to spend enormous stretches of time out in the wild, sitting close enough to elephant families to capture clean, usable recordings, all while trying not to disturb the very natural behavior they are attempting to study in the first place. Scientists involved in the project have described the entire process as slow and physically demanding, requiring years of patience just to build a dataset large enough to run through a machine learning model at all. None of that remaining uncertainty changes what the core finding already proved, beyond much doubt. What it all adds up to. None of this involved guesswork, wild speculation, or a headline stretched further than what the actual science can support. Every detail traces back to a peer-reviewed study published in the journal Nature, Ecology, and Evolution in 2024. Built from decades of carefully logged field recordings and confirmed individual identifications collected by real researchers working across multiple institutions and continents. What started as one scientist feeling a strange throbbing near a zoo enclosure back in 1984 eventually led to solid proof that elephants call each other using something remarkably close to a real personal name. It stands as one of the only confirmed examples of this kind of naming ability found anywhere outside of humans, and it suggests the deep bonds elephants form with one another run through a communication system far more sophisticated than most people ever assumed. Scientists are still listening closely to every new recording that comes in, and there is a real chance the next rumble they manage to decode reveals something just as unexpected as the last one did. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.